This is a Patreon message on the discussion of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham City Jail. Rev Derek here from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and now TikTok at Rev Derek Terry. Thank you so much for your patronage. This month we are using as a theme the Revolutionary King. I want to consider and discuss the other side of Martin Luther King. I get really annoyed that King's power and fervor for justice are often watered down to appease those who wish to discourage direct action or bold revolutionary call. Revolutionary is defined as pertaining to sudden or complete marked changes, radically new, something that's innovative outside the established procedure. And that's exactly who King was. I loathe seeing politicians saying in the spirit of King, we shouldn't do this or we shouldn't do that. And that kind of stuff proves to me that they did not know who King was, that they did not research King or his writings or his work. In the summer of 2020, after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, people went to the streets in the middle of pandemic to complain and protest. And I saw conservative politicians and pundits proclaim, this is not the way to do it. Stay home, work it out in the courts. The same thing after 17-year-old Trayvon Martin was killed at the hands of George Zimmerman, and a group of black young people dared a nation to declare Black Lives Matter. I saw outrage at the civil disobedience to call attention to the murder of a young black boy armed with just a can of tea and a bag of Skittles, yet I didn't see the same outrage when the murderer got off and then sold the very gun that he used to kill that boy with at a huge profit, selling it for $250,000. How sick is this? Moreover, how sick are the people who bought or bid on that gun? How different is that than people keeping locks of hair or body parts of black lynched bodies during America's lynching era? No, it's not a pretty thing to think about, but we must consider that there is within humans something that gives us the thought that we could victimize the victim, or we can blame the victim. Here's a little background on Martin Luther King's letter. 1963, Birmingham was the capital of Jim Crow. And Dr. King was arrested and spent 11 days in a disgusting, dirty, dingy cell. It was scary, but it was also dangerous because Dr. King was, of course, the most prominent or the most famous Negro in the world at that time. President Kennedy was nervous. His brother Bobby, the Attorney General, was nervous. Consider America at that time. In 1963, they are the last remaining vestiges of American innocence of the 1950s, right? A young, handsome president with kids in the White House and a beautiful wife. Kennedy hasn't been assassinated yet in April of 1963 when King wrote this letter. There hadn't been a march on Washington yet in 1963. The four little girls in Birmingham 16th Street Baptist Church, it hasn't been bombed yet. They haven't been killed yet. Medgar Evers is still alive. Malcolm X is still alive. There's no Bloody Sunday yet. Yet King and his people are using media to show that this beautiful, innocent country has a dark and ugly side, right? And he's showing that if black people push back against their second-class citizenship, then that innocence disappears, right? Everything appears calm, but not if you are the oppressed class. So black civil rights leader called King to Birmingham and say, hey, let's bring attention to these issues and work towards civil rights legislation. Revolution. They wanted something outside of the established procedure. Remember, that's revolution. Established procedure was that you look down when a white man or a white woman passes you on the sidewalk. Established procedure at that time meant that you had to accept second-class citizenship. King was a revolutionary because he wanted radical change. He wanted black people to be treated differently. And so he went about this by weaponizing nonviolence. They marched and they protested for their rights. And what happened is, as they marched and protested, dogs were turned on them. They were beaten. The water hose were turned on them. And at that time, America had about 3.5 TV stations, and everyone read the newspaper every day. And so they constantly saw those images. And that got the rest of the country to think, what in the world is going on in Birmingham? Why are they beating people for just marching? Why are they trying so hard to hold on to segregation? Then there's an article in the Birmingham newspaper by 8, I guess I would consider them, they would consider themselves probably moderate clergy leaders who list their grievances with King. They list about 4 major things. 1, black people marching is causing white people and the police to inflict hatred and violence because you are inciting them, you're upsetting them. 2, they claim that King is an outside agitator, but King's response is injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. 3, they claim that they should take the case to court and not the streets. They also, King says, or they also appear in their letter to be addicted to the status quo. They want to hold on to that. King wants innovation. He writes this really long essay. He starts writing it in the margin of newspapers that people smuggled to him. Then he writes it on scraps of paper, and then eventually he was allowed to have a pad. But remember, he stayed in jail 11 days in Birmingham. And of course, we know King as this amazing orator, but we also have to remember that he was an amazing writer. This letter that he wrote that we're discussing brought about change in the momentum of the civil rights movement. It helped to pass the Civil Rights Act of the next year in 1964. It helped King to be awarded the Nobel Prize in the next year, only the 2nd African American and only the 12th American to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Of course, I encourage you to read the whole entire essay. If you go on YouTube, and I'll put the link down, you can listen to an audio recording that he has reading it. For our work, I want us to consider the ideas and the themes of this essay, and I want us to consider how those themes and ideas carry over to 2021 and our current generation, and how we can do the work. The themes I list are racism, justice, and morality. I'm not going to go in order of this essay, but I'm going to look at those themes: racism, justice, morality. If you're keeping up in your notebook, racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed towards a person or group on the basis of their membership in a regular or particular racial ethnic group, typically one that is minority, that is marginalized. Understand that the fact that the white clergy people wrote this letter and it was published in a newspaper, the very fact that they published this letter and they wrote this letter, they are acting on racism. Sometimes racism is white people telling black people what to think and how to feel about their oppression. Sometimes it's white people saying, why are you marching and upsetting the good white people by trying to force us to change? It's Colin Kaepernick, just play football, boy. That's not right. That's not the right way to do it. Stop marching. Stop protesting. All lives matter, not just Black Lives Matter. King reminds us that the violence starts with the act of the perpetrator. Colin Kaepernick took a knee because he was tired of black people being killed by the police and nothing happening to the police. Consider this racist gent on my Facebook. Posted a perfectly beautiful story about why black people do push back against the idea that even though no one is a slave anymore, how, things still survive from the days of slavery. And so if physical things survive, then of course there are other things that survive. Look at this video and look at the post that we got.
Really annoyed when not racists say stuff like, no one alive today was or owned slaves. But yeah, they're right. No slaves or no slave owners still live. But you know what is still around? The U.S. Capitol, the White House, the Smithsonian, New York's Wall Street. Countless municipal buildings and government buildings all over this country are still standing that were built by slaves. Not to mention our very soil was fertilized with the blood, sweat, and tears of black Americans who were stolen from their homeland. These buildings and institutions still stand, but not racists refuse to recognize the lingering effects and the burden of the racial violence that plagues the descendants of those who built them. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. My people didn't own slaves. Regardless, we must all clean up the messes that slavery and Jim Crow left behind. Why? Because we enjoy the shade of trees that we didn't plant. We utilize buildings that we didn't build. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure liberty and justice for all.
Here's how one person responded to this video. Yes, slavery is a part of American history. A part I am not proud of. But it existed, and yes, land was cleared and buildings built. True. but accept it and be proud of the contribution slaves made to the building of America. Be thankful that some slave trader took your ancestors out of Africa and endured harsh times so that you could be born in America and contribute to her success. Yep. Enough said. So that's what people do. It's telling people how to respond to something. It's racist. It's racist. It's racist. It's racist. And so we have to push back against racism. The second thing we're looking at is justice. Justice is something that is fair. People getting what they deserve. I hate that definition because what that definition says is that someone has the power to determine what someone else deserves. And unfortunately, usually what someone else deserves is unfair. So the definition I like of justice is to make sure that everyone is treated fairly. Martin Luther King wanted the government to treat everyone fairly. In this country, black people are treated less fair than white people. Poor people are treated less fair than rich people. Martin Luther King wanted justice. He wanted the people in Birmingham, black people, to be treated with the same human dignity and respect as white people. King actually wrote, "I am here because injustice is here." And he went on to say, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, because they did not want King to be there. Why are you here? You're an outside agitator. And King said anyone who lives in the United States can never be an outsider anywhere within its bounds. This is true. Injustice and unfair treatment makes it dangerous for the rest of us. When a police officer kills an unarmed black person, they rarely face consequences. That may embolden other people in that position, in that field, to think that they can unfairly do things to other people. Stand your ground laws. Same thing. All you gotta do is say, "I was scared." You can kill people. That emboldens people to think they can get away with it. They can do something. Then a narrative is formed. Injustice becomes the status quo, the norm, the regular. Again, King is acting revolutionary in this moment because he's forcing the thought that acting outside of established procedure, pushing back against injustice, promotes or demonstrated protests and demonstrations in the street, not in the courts or diplomatic means. He's pushing back because he reminds them, we've tried to do these things, but the courts were unjust. Black people had no choice, so we had to take it to the streets. We had to bring attention, because through this attention or through this discomfort, we will bring about change. We know through painful experience, King wrote, that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. This has not changed. What demands for freedom or fairness have you seen in your life? Put that in your journal. How many of them were popular with the people that weren't in that group? Think of the women's movement, right? Think of the LGBT movement, marriage equality, immigration rights and issues. What are the others? What have I missed? What about Black Lives Matters? Which have you participated in? What else is out there? What's the ultimate pushback? It is a long quote that I want to share here, but we have to. And again, I want you to read the whole thing. But King wrote, "We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards gaining political independence. But we stiff creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging dart of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers and at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse and kick and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you have seen the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just opened and been advertised on television, and see tears welling in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, quote, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day and day out by nagging signs reading white or colored. When your first name becomes nigger, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are. And your last name becomes John. And your wife and your mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe stands, never quite knowing what to expect, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Justice. It has to be demanded. Then we look at the idea of morality. Right and wrong, good and bad behavior. Morality is a tough phrase for me. It's a tough phrase for many of us, especially one coming from a Baptist minister, right? Pardon me. I'm also a pastor and I struggle with the word, but King is talking about being moral. He's talking about love. He's talking about peace. He's talking about justice and fairness, not an individual's behavior as what they should or should not do as in their individual personal or private lives, but as related, not personal conduct. He's talking about the nation. Be true to what you said on paper, is what he's saying, right? That if all people are created equal and have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that should be the same for black people. King says, one may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws? Let's talk about moral and obeying others. The answer lies, he writes, in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the last to advocate disobeying just laws. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine. An unjust law is no law at all. Civil disobedience, in other words, we have the obligation to push back against anything that's unjust. And notice when you read the speech, how King brought up historical figures to back up what he's saying. People that might speak to the heart of these individuals. St. Augustine, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln. Well, maybe not Lincoln in Birmingham, but you get my drift. King also speaks to the idea of being an extremist. We're talking about moral. People will push these type of ideas, extremism and as if, and liberal, as if it's something wrong. And Jesus talks to these clergy leaders who said that they were trying to do too much too fast and they were extremist. And he said, quote, "But I was initially disappointed at being called or categorized as an extremist, and I continued to think about the matter. I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist?" Again, he's talking to these clergy leaders. "Love your enemies, bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Amos in the Bible, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Was Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel, who said, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus? Was not Martin Luther an extremist, who said, here I stand, I can do otherwise, I cannot do otherwise, so help me God? John Bunyan, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. Abraham Lincoln, the nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, King says, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for love or for hate? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. Thank God for the extremists. They are revolutionary. They look at the status quo and they say, no, this isn't right. And that's what we have to do. We have to push back. We have to be extremists. Please, please, please take the time to look at this. Take the time to answer those questions. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patronage. I love you. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok at Rev Derek Terry. The way these videos work, they're unlisted on YouTube, but you as a patron have the ability, you have the link, and if you would like to share that link, feel free to do so. But people will only be able to see this is if someone with who's a part of this community posts it or shares it. So there we go. Thank you again. Till next time. Take care. Peace.